Welcome. Thanks so much for coming out tonight to Armchair Travels. I'm Matthew Rothfuss with the Bethlehem Area Public Library. I'm just really delighted to have members of the Bethlehem Food Co-op here tonight. Thank you so much to my presenters and especially to Carol Burns, who helped arrange for this program. So just as a heads up, we are recording the program. It will be available on YouTube sometime possibly next week. So just keep that in mind. If you are not comfortable with your face being shown, you go ahead and turn your video off. I'm just going to turn it over to Carol and then we'll get started. Thanks so much.
Great, thanks, Matt. And we really want to thank the Bethlehem Area Public Library, and I will give a little shout out to the Friends of the Library. The Friends fund the significant portion of most of the library programming for us. So this was just a germ of an idea we had and thought this might be a fun way to connect on a cold winter evening. I am going to presume that most of you are members of the co-op, but we are recording this, so there will be lots of other folks watching this, we hope. So just at the front end, I'll give a quick commercial. The co-op started about 10 years ago with the idea to bring a community-owned full-service grocery store to Bethlehem that would be open to everyone for shopping. And almost a year ago, we signed a lease for a property at 250 East Broad Street. Point of reference, that's across the street from Connell's Funeral Home. And very shortly, we should start seeing some activity on what is now a vacant lot. They'll be building, the developers will be putting up a 4-story building, and we'll be leasing the bottom floor for our co-op that's going to be built specifically for us. So we're pretty excited about that. We are community owned, which means our members own the co-op. We have a share in the say of what's going on in the store. And again, the store will be open to the general public. So we're in a very exciting planning mode right now, but I'm going to stop talking and we're going to kick off our travels. We have an hour. I'm going to also say this is unscripted. It's unrehearsed. We gathered some slides and thought we would just invite everybody to take a little ride with us across the country. We literally will go coast to coast and see what other co-ops are doing around the country. So with that, I'm going to introduce Elliot Noelter, who's going to kick us off.
Thanks, Carol. I guess go to the next slide. All right, so Willie Street Co-op is in Madison, Wisconsin. I think they have 2, maybe 3 locations. And this, I believe, was the second location. So not the original, but they've been established for, I don't know, 30 years or something like that. Kathy, you can fact check me, Kathy Fox, but they've been around a long time, let's just say that, and they're very well established in their community. Kathy and I went out and visited them back in March of 2020, right before the pandemic. There was just whispers of some virus that was in China at the time. And so we made it out there, luckily, for the conference and back safely. So this is, the front of the store, obviously. That is a standalone building for them. So they have, the whole space is theirs. They don't have a second floor or a tenants above like we're going to have. But as you can see, very kind of fresh looking, the signage and everything, very kind of contemporary and upbeat. I guess go to the next slide. They had a lot of kind of neat ideas. I think they had more square footage than we're going to have, but they had this juice and coffee area. They had like a customer service desk for members. They had different merchandise, like local made products and t-shirts. I know I got a t-shirt for my daughter while we were out there. And I guess this is like their kind of bakery coffee bar. I didn't try any of their baked goods, but everything looked delicious. Go ahead to the next. They also had bulk cleaning products, which was pretty cool. That's something that we've heard a lot from our members that they'd like to see in our store. So this was their approach for that. I don't recall if this was a bring your own container or if you used their containers, but some places they allow you to, actually bring your own container and weigh it right there, so that you can kind of price out your own soap or shampoo or whatever. This looks like maybe the Mrs. Meyer's product line on the top there. I can't read it, but those labels look familiar. Next. There's me with a big cheesy grin. Kathy and I ate there, and we were pleasantly surprised to see that where you return your dishes, and there were actual dishes and trays, not paper products or plastic. They had a compost bin, trash, and recycling. So we hope to do something similar in our store where we can collect food waste and compost it. Next. This is now down in Ambler. This is Weaver's Way, Ambler, the outside. I just took this picture because they have bike racks and outdoor tables. This is something that could be very similar to the front of our store in terms of, we'll have bike racks. The parking will be about that far from the front. So we could potentially have tables and things out there. Next. This was kind of cool. I didn't get a whole lot of information about this, but they had like this mobile greenhouse in the parking lot. And it looks like it's not necessarily they maybe don't own it. I don't know what this Image 360 Philly thing is, but I thought this was pretty cool. So they had like some fresh produce in there. It wasn't open at the time, but I could kind of see through the glass. Next. They also had a community fridge outside, which is a kind of neat idea. We haven't talked about this, but that's something that we could maybe implement down the line, where people either buy products and then put them in the fridge, or if you're in need of some fresh produce and different items, you can come and take what you need at no cost. It's kind of neat. So the members support it, and local people who need the food can come and take some. And they had dried goods on the side there, and then that fridge was full of different stuff. Next. This is in Brattleboro, Vermont. Similar, at least in size, to our store, like the height of it. Ours will also be a 4-story new building. This is very new, and it had a big entrance signage and canopy. This is kind of like right downtown in this was inside. They had a big wine and beer selection there. I also thought this was kind of interesting, the ductwork they painted to look like a birch tree. But yeah, it was very open inside, high ceilings, exposed structure, just very kind of new and modern feeling. Next. They also had some local artwork and ceramics, and I think this was kind of like a cheese and possibly like baked goods in this area. They had like counter kind of wrapped around, and there was staff there. I don't think this wasn't the deli. Deli was off to the left, but this was kind of a little station in the middle of the store where they had, different ceiling treatment and lighting, and it was kind of like a featured display area. Next. I thought this was a cool sign. This was as you're leaving, I think, as you're leaving the store. Um, just has a lot of their values kind of written out on the sign. Next. This was cool too. This was like a curbside pickup fridge that they had in their vestibule. So I imagine, if you order online, they'll come and place your order in these fridges, and then you can just pick it up right in the vestibule without having to go into the store. I don't know how they handled it in terms of security and, labeling whose is what, but I'm sure they had some kind of system in place. But I thought that was cool. It was right in the vestibule. Next. Oh, this is the next store.
This is for Chris Gomez.
Okay, so we're still at Brattleboro Food Co-op. Actually, this is their bulk section. I've been going to Brattleboro Food Co-op for over 10 years, and it's just a delight to be there all the time. It's wonderful. Everything is so fresh, and they do local as much as they can. There's a lot of farms within a 10-mile radius of the food co-op, and a lot of their produce in the summer does come from that radius. So this is their bulk area. Lots and lots of spices, beans, seeds, all sorts of fun things to pick up. And Elliot, they do both. You can use their containers that are there, or you can bring your own container and do your thing there. So next. So here they have bulk everything. Bulk oil, I think there was bulk even soy sauce and all sorts of things that you could bring little bottles, fill it up. Maybe even vanilla extract is in there. Unfortunately, I didn't take a close-up, so I can't read some of the labels on it. But you can see they have the ball cans at the bottom, the glass jars at the bottom. If you prefer using a glass jar, you can just pick that up. You'll pay for it at the checkout counter and do that. So more of their amazing bulk items that they have. And this was my favorite. They've got maple syrup on tap, which is very funny considering you tap maple trees to get maple syrup. So, and you can see that there are different grades. You've got the dark with a robust, and the amber and the golden with a delicate taste. It's all wonderful. You can't go wrong with maple syrup. Maple syrup's just delightful. So yeah, it's kind of a favorite of mine.
Thanks, Chris. I'm up next. And one thing, I just read an article last week, and they talked about Vermont has like the most co-ops per capita of any state. So there's your fun fact for that.
Yes, they do.
So I am pinch hitting for two of our members, Kelly and Dan, who visited the French Broad Food Co-op in Asheville, North Carolina. And I thought the name was very interesting because when I first saw it, I thought they were saying French bread, but it's French broad. So I was actually hoping they'd be here so we could ask about the origin of that name.
Carol, I can tell you it's the name of a river. It's the French Broad River. They do a
Okay.
lot of kayaking, whitewater rafting, things like that on there.
Okay, thank you. Trivia question number 2. Next. And they gave me a little narrative, which will not go along with the pictures. So next. Okay, so French Broad Food Co-op is located in a city a lot like Bethlehem, and it's located right in the downtown area and very convenient. They have a big produce section, frozen goods, pantry items, toiletries, bulk items, and their favorite part, which was great prepared foods. Next, and then in the prepared food section, all their takeaway containers were compostable, but that was very interesting. The produce was organic and most package free of their produce. And she said it has what you expect to find in the grocery store, but being 100% community owned and supporting their local farmers. Next. Okay, and they said that visiting that co-op made them very excited to get ours open. So this next picture, Kathy and I visited Kensington Food Co-op, which is in the Philly area. We visited them this summer, and they actually took over two side-by-side retail spots, and this side was a bar. So they kept the bar, and the artwork just really caught our eye. The carrot tree. So there you go. And then this is across from the bar. Oh, thanks. You can go to the next slide. Across from the bar was a built-in seating area. And the part I liked was that they were displaying the artwork by local artists and had it for sale. This is not the local artwork. I'm the communications person, so it caught my eye that they had like a community bulletin board. You can go to the next one, Matt. Thanks. Oh, go back. There we go. They just used twine and clothespins, and it was very organic and very informal way to, like, right when you walked in the door, you could either go left to the eating area and where the wine was, or you could go right into the store proper. So this was right when you first came in, made for a nice community sharing area. Next. And then we also stopped by the Mariposa Food Co-op, which interestingly was built in an old bank. So it still had all the maple or the marble floors and really high ceilings. And I believe they said the vault was still there. And I can't remember what they were using it for. But anyway, I took this picture just because I liked how they articulate their values and had them posted right for everybody to see. Next. Okay, I'm going to pass the baton to John Bruner, who took a very long ride out west and saw a lot of co-ops. So pass it over to you, John.
Okay. Well, the reason I did this tour was because I represented the board, not as a board member of the food co-op, but as a member, number 9. And I went to the Up and Coming Food Co-op conference in Milwaukee in 2017. And when that was done, I continued on to the West Coast to visit some family. And my first stop was not a very remarkable co-op per se, but I had to call them out because the Outpost Natural Foods in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, was one of the 3 or perhaps 4 stores that are known as the Outpost Natural Food Stores. And they were actually the local sponsor of the Up and Coming Food Conference. And they had a store or 2 in downtown and then 1 on either side of the city of Milwaukee. Next slide. Next slide. Heading west, I stopped at Sioux Falls Food Co-op. That's good. And of course, on this trip, I tried to stop at every food co-op on the way. And yeah, you can go to the next slide. And, try to eat at each, usually often in the morning, I'd get to a destination. And of course, my luck, they were not open. Next slide. But they had a nice smaller store. And I realized this was the first of a pattern that, every store that I visited out of the probably 12 or 13 stores, and you're not going to see all of them, don't worry, all had wine on display and beer, which thrilled me, actually. Next slide. I don't really want to spend time talking about this one, and I don't have other images, but the Breadroot Natural Foods Co-op, it was in, where was it? Rapid City, South Dakota. And I stopped in 3 co-ops across South Dakota, which I thought was impressive, and I'm sure that they're not the only co-ops in the state. But next slide. The Good Earth. This was remarkable because it was a former car dealership. Next slide. It was vast, and yes, they had really good food there. And by the way, this is in Billings, Montana, which is kind of an industrial city. It's sort of reminiscent of Bethlehem in its own way. But it was a really nice store. It was big. And the weird thing is most of the stores I was in were smaller and they were packed. This store was vast and sort of seemed a little bit empty because it was so big. Next slide. But they had a lounge upstairs. I'm not so sure Bethlehem Food Co-op will have the luxury of a whole floor where people can hang out, and maybe in the pandemic era, that's not a good idea, but I thought that was pretty cool. Next slide. And most of the co-ops I was in posted the 7 cooperative principles somewhere in the store. Next slide. Bozeman. This is Bozeman, Montana Community Food Co-op. This was a really fancy food co-op, but they did start out in 1953 in a corrugated metal shed, which I thought was pretty impressive. Now they have a couple stores in Bozeman, and if you know about Bozeman, there's a lot of movie stars that have ranches around it, and it was pretty high-end, well-endowed food co-op. Next slide. They featured, I tried to interview, by the way, managers at every store I went to, and this guy was a produce manager, and talked to him about the history of the co-op. Next slide. They featured their solar facilities at this location, so they played up the sustainability of their building. It was, I don't think it was a LEED Platinum, but it might have been a LEED certified building. Go ahead. They had a great wellness section. Next slide. And a fabulous hot bar where you could serve yourself in this case. Next slide. I showed this next co-op is the Missoula Community Food Co-op. Was actually supposed to be open, but it was not open. Next slide. It was kind of a sad little co-op, but the reason I'm featuring it is this woman happened to be there who I met in an adjacent coffee shop, and she runs the agricultural co-op in Missoula. And I just wanted to call out the fact that in the Midwest and the High Plains and even the Northeast and Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine, agricultural co-ops, at least in the Midwest, are sort of the backbone of the co-op movement in general. They're really important. They share facilities, share storage. And she said, there's some sort of, they have relationships with the food co-op as well and share storage space. Next slide. So then we moved to the West Coast states and we're in Spokane, Washington. And this food co-op, the Garden Food Co-op, was built from scratch by a developer who had an interest in developing this area and was really into the co-op movement. Next slide. This was a LEED Platinum LEED certified building, and it was quite beautiful. Next slide. They had a pretty killer salad bar and prepared foods there. Next slide. Just another view of the produce section. Next slide. There I'm talking to the produce manager, and she manages the rooftop garden. They have gardening space on the roof aside from other features, so they capture stormwater and grow things on the top of the roof. And I'm pointing to the beer selection, of course. Next slide. This might have been my favorite co-op that I visited in the co-op building, the Skagit Valley, Washington. This is getting closer to the coast and closer to Seattle. Next slide. This was a rather large co-op, and they did have a robust, now I was out there in March and April, so they had a robust garden center outside with plants. Next slide. An excellent facility. The store was really gorgeous and big, and it was also, I was there at lunchtime, so it was quite intense. Next slide, you'll see maybe some of the hot bar stuff. Well, here they've devoted a whole space to wine, not surprisingly, being in Washington. Next slide. Just a note on that wine thing, I noticed in the West Coast, every store had a wine featured from a co-op, a wine co-op from Argentina. I thought that was kind of cool. This is the prepared foods area, and they had a hot bar and extensive prepared foods and a seating area to, separate place with tables. Okay. Moving on to Bellingham, Washington. This is a coastal city. On my way up to visit my brother at the top of Washington. Bellingham is a city maybe about the size of Bethlehem, maybe a little smaller. Go ahead, next slide. This is a gorgeous layout that they had in their produce section. You get a good view looking back towards the deli section. Next. Free fruit for kids. That was kind of a cool feature, encouraging healthy eating habits. The bulk food section, you can see, went down an entire aisle on both sides. Next section. Notice the featuring the participation in the co-op, the vote, the election. That was kind of neat. Next slide. And they had a standalone bakery across the street, which I thought was pretty impressive. I didn't get inside there, but that's it. Next slide. I met this guy. This is their, they have a room next to the bakery that's for demonstration and educational purposes. And this gentleman was hanging out there waiting for a meeting, and he happened to be from South Philly. So we chatted. He moved to Washington a couple decades ago. Next slide.
John, was the bakery its own retail space, or was it just there to provide
No, it was
goods
both.
to the
Retail.
co-op?
Yeah, it was retail and supplied the bread in the store too.
Okay, so you
Yep.
didn't have to make 2 trips.
Nope. This was the famous PCC community markets. I believe they have 5 stores in the Seattle area. And this is in Seattle in Fremont section. And it used to stand for in 1953, when they were founded, the Puget Sound Community Co-op. But now it's just PCC community markets. Next slide. Notice how that was integrated into residential space, though, above the store, similar to, I believe, what the Bethlehem Food Co-op may have. This is a look inside at their produce. Next slide. Just a look at their logo since 1953. Next slide. Here you go. This co-op also runs a farmland trust. Now, I know that Wildlands doesn't want, Conservancy wants more competition in the area, but it's just something to think about. Next slide. Their bulk food section, kind of a standalone corner of the store. Next slide. And now we're in Portland, Oregon. This is the Food Front Cooperative. It's kind of a small one in downtown Portland, really jam-packed with stuff. I mean, it was almost claustrophobic, but it was a very good store. They had a lot of outdoor plants and things for sale. When you go inside, next slide. Oh, sorry, we're not inside yet. I admired this mural they had on the outside of the building, but they had the mural was kind of speaks to the nature-loving populace of Oregon. Next slide. You get a sense of, how jam-packed and tight the store was, but it was loaded with great stuff. Next slide. Here's another unique feature that this co-op sponsors a neighborhood cleanup every Saturday, second Saturday. Another thing to put on the list. Just a cool sign. Next slide. That's part of their bulk food section. Next slide.
Okay.
Yep, that's it.
Whew.
I skipped the Eureka, California Co-op and a couple others, but they were not that remarkable, and I didn't have that, much to say about it that was unique. That's it.
That was
Plus, I
great.
just, yeah.
Okay, Kathy?
Okay. All right. So I went down to a co-op conference down in Durham, North Carolina.
Kathy, I'm having a hard time hearing you, and I think you just froze up.
What did you say, Carol?
I said, I think you froze there for a minute. I didn't hear what you had to say.
Oh, okay. I know that my connection is not that good, so sorry about that. Anyway, so I went to Durham and I did the Durham Food Co-op, but I don't really have any pictures of that. But I also went to the Weaver Street Market Co-op, and they've been around for about 35 years, and this is just one of their 3 stores. Next. So what I really was drawn to this front, when the doors opened up, this is what you saw. I love the color. I also like their little logo. They had just gone through a rebranding, and so their colors were very vibrant, and it was really a lovely looking, at least the front was very lovely coming in. Next. Oh, okay. So, I think we skipped a few pictures, but one of the things that was unique about this co-op is not only did they have 3 stores, they also had a food processing kind of plant or factory. And this is the outside of it. And underneath all that vegetation, their workers would sit or come out during their breaks. And that was the entrance into their factory, where they processed a lot of the food that they sold, not only in their own co-ops, but also in other co-ops. Next. Oh, well, this was in the store. And the reason I chose this picture is to show you all their little tags. So they make all this food in that, that warehouse, and they package it, and then they bring it into their stores for sale. Next. Well, one of the things that they're pretty famous for, I guess, down there is their hummus. So that's why I took a picture of all this tahini, because this is how they buy it in bulk. And this is the brand they use. And they have huge where they make a lot at one time and package it and distribute it to all their co-ops. Next. Okay, so I will tell you that during this day that I was at the processing plant, I was getting a private tour, and this gentleman right here is the executive chef to Weaver Street, and he just happened to be my cousin's sister-in-law's husband. Anyway, so while I was down in Durham for this conference, I actually stayed at my cousin and his wife, their home, and met Glenn. This is Glenn and his wife, and I was invited to take a tour of the processing plant. And these are chickpeas, anyway, to go along with the tahini to make the hummus. So next. This is one of their bakers, and they bake their own products. And not only did they sell their breads and their pastries and things at their own stores, when I was at the Durham Food Co-op, I found their product there too. Next. There's a sample of what they make. Next. I took a picture of the compost buckets because there were a few of them in there, and I like that idea that the co-ops do a lot of composting of their organic scraps and their paper and things like that, instead of throwing it into the trash. Next. Okay, well, this is one of my favorite shots. I did not save a lot of shots from Durham, but this picture is actually of the Durham Food Co-op. And I just loved looking at that little girl going around picking up her vegetables. It was adorable. I also very much liked the bright colors in the Durham Food Co-op. They had only been open for about 4 years. And one thing I liked about them, and I did go to it every Thursday night, they had $4 dinners, and you could go in there and you just you pay for $4, you get a chip. You go over to their prepared food area, and they'll have a spread of like a protein, a vegetable, and maybe a starch, and you get to choose what you want, put it in a tin or compostable package, and then you got to either eat inside or they had tables outside. And there were a ton of people there because it was excellent organic food. You can have your whole dinner for $4. And then you also had some entertainment outside. They had like acoustic guitar. It was just a really nice vibe. I really enjoyed the $4 dinner Thursdays there. Next. Oh, okay.
That's it.
I think.
Yay. So thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. Whether you have ever been in another co-op before or you're well-traveled like John and some of our other presenters. I was in my first co-ops this summer, and it really was interesting to see what was the same, but what was different from my typical shopping experiences. So again, for anyone who's not familiar with what we're doing, we're bringing a community-owned full-service grocery store to 250 Broad Street in Bethlehem, and in about a year, we should be opening our doors, and everyone will be welcome to shop there. And per Matt, this travelogue has been recorded and will be on the Bethlehem Area Public Library YouTube in about a week. And we'll also share that link with everybody as well on our social and our newsletter. So we have about 20 people here, but Matt, if you can take that down, and I think we'll try to open it for some questions, and we'll unmute folks. We'll see what we can do with that.